Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
Hey, welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. Good to have you with us today. With our special guest, the rumors are swirling around Ottawa these days. Budget is coming out in a couple of days. There's going to be a vote on the budget, of course. Will the budget pass? If it doesn't, well, there are all sorts of complications that could fall into place here. None of them good as far as the governing Liberals are concerned. The government could fall. There's a few other things going around that has led some wild speculation. So to get some clarity on this, we are so pleased to welcome back to our podcast our good friend, Dr. Laurie Turnbull. Dr. Turnbull, of course, is a senior advisor on the Institute for Governance from Dalhousie University. Laurie, it's been a while. Thank you so much. Great to have you back on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so good to see you.
Let's talk a bit about the piece that was published in the Hill Times that you wrote just a couple of days ago. Say it's politics first, as usual. As I say, this is a rather tumultuous time. Anytime there's a budget about to be presented by any government, what's your sense? What's the mood on the Hill these days about exactly what's going to be happening? I think we all know, the foundation here. What's going on? It's a minority government. Carney's promising a budget that's actually going to increase spending. A lot of people aren't happy about that. But is this the usual rhetoric that falls in, or there's fire where there's smoke that we're smelling these days?
Well, so as you say, this sort of rhetoric about will the budget pass or not, that stuff is par for the course when there's a minority government. We always see that. And I think in this case, there are a couple of factors that make it a bit different. One is that this is a big moment for the Carney government. He is not really a tested politician at this point. I mean, he is in the sense that he won the leadership, he won the election. But in terms of moving things through Parliament, this is not a prime minister who says a whole lot about what his plans are, what he's thinking. They have leaked a little bit of the budget, but it strikes me that the big pieces are largely unknown at this point, right? Like, he's going to be spending more, he's going to be cutting too. And what is that going to look like, right? And so I think it's harder to predict what the post-budget, the immediate post-budget discussion will be and what follows from that. I think that the composition of Parliament is kind of weird in the sense that the Liberals have a very strong minority, but they're missing those 3 extra seats to turn it into a majority. They broke up with the NDP, who lost party status. They're in the middle of a leadership selection process. The Conservatives, it seems to me, are now really in a strange spot after the comments that Pierre Poilievre made about former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau should have gone to jail over the Ogacon business. And, if not for the RCMP getting involved to protect him, he would have. That seems to have kind of thrown a bit of a wrench into the Conservative conversation, where you hear more rumors now in Ottawa about maybe Poilievre's support is not as cemented as it was before. And so much uncertainty going on. And then in terms of thinking how the various political parties would decide whether it was in their interest to roll the dice at an election or to just suck it up and either support the budget or abstain or let the Liberals pass it on their own.
Let's talk about those options, because I know you mentioned those in the piece, and there are a couple of things and a couple of different ways this can go. They can vote it up or down, or as usual. But as you mentioned, there's a consequence and a dynamic at place here. If I were a betting man, and I'm not, there's no way any conservative is going to vote in favor of this budget. They just philosophically they don't do that. The NDP, as you mentioned, are no longer kissing cousins with the government of the day. So there's that. But at the same time, there are consequences. And in the past, when there was a controversial budget, shall we say, and parties didn't really want to see the government fall and go to an election, there were some tools they could use. They could, get caught in the elevator and miss the vote, or, hey, I'm stuck out in Kamloops or Blind River or whatever the case might be. They can vote remotely right now, so there's really no excuse. So they're going to have to stand up and be counted, aren't they?
So that's where it gets tricky, I think, particularly for the NDP. Because I think everybody expects that the Conservatives will vote against the budget. I think the Bloc Québécois are playing their hand in such a way that they're going to vote against the budget because they want these things that the Liberals aren't going to do. They've made that very public. And so they're positioning themselves to be far away from a yes vote on the budget. So it leaves the NDP. And for them, I mean, they certainly don't want to be in the position of voting for an austerity budget, anything that doesn't seem to work for workers, anything that doesn't directly address the affordability crisis. And even if the budget wasn't so bad from the NDP's perspective. I think they're in an existential crisis because of the deal they had with Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. They lost their identity in that. They have to get it back. They can't be looking like they're propping up Carney, and that's the whole reason they're there. And so they're in a really difficult position. And so, as you say, if they stay home, they risk looking like they are really abdicating. Right? Like what I suspect would probably happen is like some of the members of the NDP caucus would show up and the others would stay home just to let the math work out so that the budget passes, but they still can show up and have some kind of voice. But it's tricky because, as you say, people can vote remotely. People expect their MPs to do their work and cast their ballots. And on a budget, it doesn't get any more important than that.
But do we, let's ask the age-old question here, which certainly applies now. Do we want an election right now? And that's, I guess, a two-part question, isn't it, Lori? Do the politicians up on the Hill right now want an election? And conversely, does the public want an election? I mean, we just had one in the springtime, of course, and we're dealing with those results now. You saw the Ecos poll that was released just a couple of days ago, and we talked about this on the podcast. By about a 2-to-1 margin, Canadians are saying, no, we do not want to go to the polls. Please don't do this to us. But also, if you look at the breakdown as they did in that particular poll, about 78% of conservatives say, yeah, bring it on. Let's go because we think our guy can win this thing. So they're at cross purposes right now. So that may be a pretty strong reflection on how the public feels. What about on the Hill? I mean, there are consequences to this, as we say. Now, we know where the Conservatives are going to be. As you say, the pressure seems to be on the NDP right now about whether or not they're going to do something to make this pass. It's only 3 votes. That the Liberals really need at this. I was kind of reminded as I was reading your piece about, the common theme through the movie Lincoln years ago with Daniel Day-Lewis. He needs those votes, and it can be by abstention, it can be by this, it can be by that. So there are a couple of different avenues that they can follow right now. Is there some political jockeying going on, as there always has been during budget time, to try to make this happen, or are they just digging their heels in and saying no, we're not budging?
If there are, typically at this time, there are behind the scenes machinations going on all the time. And, to kind of think back of a previous example, the budget that Paul Martin passed, for example, when the numbers were very, very close, and it ended up being that whole drama where Belinda Stronach crossed the floor, and it was all, all this kind of minute to minute, like clearly, even though it wasn't visible to the public, there were conversations being had about how to move votes. Now, I heard earlier last week that 5 Conservative MPs were prepared to cross the floor. And then things happened and that didn't happen. Now, I don't know if that's totally true. That's just what I heard from a few people on the Hill, that there, especially after those RCMP comments, there was potential movement afoot in the Conservative fold, but apparently that's been sewed back together now. So, I think I have to think that the House leaders are talking. I have to think that Stephen McKinnon is having conversations with some the other House leaders to figure out what's going to happen, that people are having conversations with Don Davies to see how the NDP plan to play this. But it seems like the opposition parties are not finding ways to say, look, if you do this, we'll support the budget. The things that they're throwing out as potential olive branches or ways to cooperate are not things that the Liberals are going to do, and they know it. And for their part, Stephen McKinnon is out saying, well, if the budget doesn't pass, it's the opposition party's fault, and we don't have the numbers. So the posturing doesn't suggest to me that good conversations are happening. Maybe they are, but it would be hard to see that from the public's vantage point, I think.
But they were a lot more transparent about it in the old days. I can remember that Martin budget, and the House leader then was Tony Valeri, who was an MP from the Hamilton areas, and I knew Tony pretty well. So we had some off-the-record discussions about this, and there was a lot of horse trading that went on. And then there, of course, there was, to go back, the not too distant here, there was the famous Chuck Cadman vote, of course, on one particular issue. He was, I guess, turned out to be an independent MP from BC who basically kept the government alive. And so there's that element going on. And, if everybody was looking as they were doing the roll call, what's he going to do? What's he going to do? There was drama there. There's drama in this one too, but it doesn't seem to be of the same kind, and simply because we don't quite know the sorts of discussions that are going on. I mean, I'm getting the sense from some of the comments I've read over the last little while, from Prime Minister Carney, from Poilievre, and others, we know Carney met with the other leaders of the parties over the last couple of days before he went out to the Orient and to find out what was going there. But it seemed to be, thanks for coming out. Appreciate your input into this, but I'm not changing anything.
Right.
And Nick Nanos talked about this in an article, and I guess he was on CTV, one of the shows, talking about that, saying that's not Carney's style. He's not the sort of guy that's going to say, what does it take? What can I do for you? What can I put on the table? Which I think is the same tact he's still taking with the Trump administration too. So I don't get the sense that this guy's willing to do a whole lot of horse trading right now. He's basically, I guess, asking his people, sell this thing and make sure you can get some support right now, and kind of turning the pressure around. Is that a pretty accurate way of the strategy that seems to be going forth here?
I agree with you. And I would say too, let's do another throwback while we're at it, Stephen Harper and the team around him knew that they needed, or that they would be very well served by building some kind of relationship with Jack Layton, and knowing that they needed that to work out. And they never formed any kind of a cemented, confidence and supply agreement where they could basically count on the support. Like, it was always politics. It was always bringing Jack Layton in for real, and the team around Harper, the Guy Giornos and Corey Tenike and Ian Brody and all those people, Nigel Wright, like people around Harper who would take care of that politics. And there was a relationship between Harper and Layton, and there was horse trading. There was a sense of like, we need each other here. There was politics, and I don't get the sense from Carney at all that he is practicing any politics. And I don't know who in that PMO is directing political traffic and who is taking that role of, we need to, like, it's because it's not just about the House leaders, right? Like that's kind of the obvious part. It's more about the people behind the scenes who can speak for the Prime Minister and have his political compass and have his political trust, and can go and massage those kinds of relationships in a way that the public doesn't necessarily know what's going on. But the staff, the Jerry Butts, the Katie Telfords, it's not clear who is playing those roles for Mark Carney at all. And in the absence of as far as I know, he doesn't have a director of communications. Like, I think Tim Pitfield is his principal secretary, but you don't really see any evidence of that. Blanchard is the chief of staff. He seems to be engaging much more on the foreign policy, diplomatic, economic side than he is on the political side. And so I think this is shaping up to be a kind of an implication of Mark Carney as a CEO as opposed to a prime minister. I think he has a political blind spot that is making these sorts of budget, the budget dance, the pre and the post, a little bit weird this time.
You mentioned communications director, and I want to go back on that. And some people may look at this and say, well, what's the big deal? So what? That's just the person that issues press releases. But let's talk for a second about how very important that is. This is a minority government. The Prime Minister has made a number of speeches. The most recent one, of course, was to the University of Ottawa students a little more than a week ago now, that was broadcast nationally. And it was a reiteration of his message that this is going to be tough, some tough choices coming up, some pain and suffering, but an austerity budget, yet at the same time, the spending has gone up considerably. The message I get from what he said so far, Laurie, and from McKinnon and others, is that, we're going to spend a lot more money, but it's investment. In other words, we're going to spend the money on things that are going to bring money back to us in the short term and in the long term. So the question, I guess, that we have to ask ourselves, and hopefully the government's asking, are they doing a good enough job of selling that? Are the Canadian people buying that? Because I don't see a whole lot of messaging coming forward right now to say, this is going to be great. Yeah, it's going to cost us a little bit now, but, it's like buying a house. Nobody wants to spend $1 million, but you're going to have a house, and pretty soon you're going to own it, or any other thing where there's going to be a return on that investment. That seems to be the sell job here right now, but I don't see anybody really beating that drum for the government.
No, exactly. And I think that there's confusion about what he means when he talks about investment. I think on some level it was a smart idea to pitch this to younger people who maybe the Liberals aren't necessarily able to count on their support as much as they were before. I think that's ground that they have lost to a large extent to the Conservatives. At least that was the way the wind was blowing before the last election. But I think they have to kind of break this up into smaller pieces and let people understand how the investments are going to help them in terms of the affordability crisis. Because like Carney knows, and we all know that there are pieces that have been neglected for a long time. There are reasons why there's not the private interest, like the interest in private investment in Canada that we need. That's part of Carney's project in terms of trying to get the private money to flow for some of the projects he wants to do. Like we get all that, but he needs to be able to answer the question, what is this going to do for me now, a month from now? How is this going to help people get jobs, get better jobs, pay their bills? Like all of this is against a backdrop of a lot of organized labor disruption and unrest, right? Like we see lots of strikes now because people don't have enough even when they're working full time. And so if he doesn't have answers to those questions, he runs the risk of looking tone deaf, just like Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland did when people were voicing their concerns about the affordability crisis. And Freeland says she's going to cancel her Disney subscription. Like they can't run the risk of looking like that, or else Pierre Poilievre finds a wedge. Despite his likability issues, he finds a way to get in because he starts talking to people about real things like the cost of living.
Well, and how do you sell something like that? I mean, I'm in my library here. So somewhere I've got David Plouffe's book here, about how getting Obama elected, and David Axelrod's book here too. They were great strategists. They sold hope. They saw yearning, they heard yearning from the American people then, and Obama's whole thing that proved to be very successful with the audacity of hope. Poilievre tried that in the last election. I don't know how much it resonated with Canadian voters because they just don't like the guy. But how does the Prime Minister and his staff sell hope? In other words, we understand the challenges. Nobody needs to tell us about the housing crisis, about the cost of living, about layoffs, and they're absolutely right. Some of it has to do with what's happening with Trump these days and the tariffs and the implications of that, or with China, who are also a player in this too. But to the average person who just lost their job, or who's just, paying $18 for a little piece of steak these days at the store, they say, I don't care what's causing it. What are you going to do about it? And that seems to be the question. How do they answer that? And will this budget go a long ways towards giving the public some of those answers?
I think that's fascinating. So let's stay with Pierre Poilievre for a minute, because I think he has this thing that he does that he undermines himself. He gets in his own way. Because if you didn't know anything else about Pierre Poilievre and you listen to him talk about, if this was the first time you saw him and he's talking about, like if you're working hard and you're a good person and you're paying your taxes and you're following the law, you deserve to have a nice house with a car in the driveway and a garage, and you should be able to go on vacation. Like if you didn't hear all the other negative crap he says, to me, he is telling you why he wants to be Prime Minister, and in a way that matters to you, right? When he talks about, we're going to build affordable housing units in Calgary, and we're going to put that next to a transit station so that you'll be able to get to work in an affordable way on time every day and not stress out about it. Well, that makes sense to people. And that's like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes total sense. Why wouldn't we do that? We shouldn't have done that before. But with Prime Minister Carney, I think that he hasn't told that kind of story about why he wants to be Prime Minister and what his vision for the country is. I don't know what kind of life Mark Carney thinks we should have, right? Like, and even the other day when he talked about, people, he was talking about Doug Ford in the ad about with Ronald Reagan, and he was saying, everybody's got a right to weigh in, essentially, right? Like, we'll take unsolicited free advice, no problem. And then he said, all Canadians are stakeholders in these negotiations. And I thought, for a prime minister to call the citizens of the country stakeholders, I understand the point he was making. But if that's really the way he sees it, that says a lot about his leadership. And it's like, where is your vision? Where is your passion? What is it that drives you in terms of, and is it just because you think our economy is screwed and you want to fix it? Which is fine. But I feel like there's something missing in the storytelling from this government, from this prime minister. And I think it makes it harder for us to know where we fit in his plan. And without that decom, at least none that I can see, there's nobody who's taking the microphone to tell the story for him either. now it's just Stephen McKinnon saying the opposition parties have to vote for the budget. Like, that is not it. That's not what they need.
What the public are looking for, as I say here, is some answers. I mean, we used to use the phrase, my buddy Charles Adler, who you know quite well as well, and Chuck and I used to talk about that with kitchen table issues. In other words, what
Yeah.
are they talking about? How is this going to affect me? And I'm concerned about the future of my job, etc. How's the government going to do something about that? And Carney's talking about it, but my question is whether or not it's resonating. And I'm looking at some of the recent polling, Laurie, that I think seems to indicate that. And we've heard about this with the discussions with the United States. I don't even call them negotiations because the way I'm seeing it right now, the United States is not negotiating. This is here are our listed demands. You'll like it and shut up. That seems to be, and the UK and others have said, sure, instead of a 40% share, well, 20, that's a victory for us. And Carney says, I'm not playing that game. And I respect him for that. And I think Canadians do. That he's taking a stand like that. They get the fact that they're dealing with a guy like that. But on the issues and how it to reach the Canadian people, it seems to be a different tact. Poll after poll, the Nanos poll, so many others, see that gap narrowing. And a couple of them actually have the Conservatives ahead by a point or two in these popular polls. And I think that probably signifies some of the frustrations voters are feeling. But to your point, when they say, okay, question 2, who do you want to lead the country? Carney's still beating Poilievre by over 20 points. So they say, we're not crazy about the way things are going, but sure as hell don't give the reins to that guy. How do you reconcile those two differences?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's there, right? It's black and white, which is why when the earlier number that you threw out with 78% of Conservatives say they want an election, why? Because if it happens after the budget, you don't have enough time to get rid of Poilievre and replace him with somebody else. Like, that leadership review is not scheduled till January. He'll win that because he's smart and shrewd and organized enough to make sure the right people are in the room at the right time.
Yeah.
But I don't think there is the kind of unity behind him in the Conservative movement right now than there was a year ago. And I understand why, right? The big question is, can you win? And it's not clear that he can. And this is not the first time in the long time that I have been devoting all of my time to studying politics. This is not the first time I've seen a big gap in terms of where the parties are sitting and where the leaders are sitting. And in my experience, the number that matters is the leaders, especially when you're going to go into an election. It's the party brand is not going to be enough to hoist up a leader who is behind by 20 points. Like, unless a whole hell of a lot changed over the campaign, I would think it's a major risk for the Conservatives to go into an election with Poilievre sitting where he is right now.
Well, and there's the poll that was out about, I guess it was the middle of the summertime. They basically said, I think it was about 60 or 70% of the Canadians said they'd be embarrassed if Pierre Poilievre was our Prime Minister.
Yeah, that's
pretty strong language.
Yeah,
pretty strong language. Are the Conservatives paying attention to that, or are they simply dismiss? Publicly, they're saying, "Oh, no big deal." Yeah, but is there some concern in the caucus and in the ivory towers of the Conservative big thinkers now that we've got a leadership problem here?
Like, that's what I have heard, is that there is, especially after, again, these comments about the RCMP and Justin Trudeau, it seems like there has been a palpable line that's been crossed here in terms of, oh my God, what is this guy going to say? And does he really mean this? And I think the kind of post-mortem analysis on that interview that he did, where he made those comments, is that he wasn't led to that. Like, this was not, he ended up being caught in the conversation where he ended up kind of saying this, and maybe he regrets it. He was relaxed and seemed to be in his full self when he made these comments with no discomfort whatsoever. And I think there are, like, in that caucus, and I think what really matters here in terms of the future of the leader is the caucus rather than the leadership review in January. And I have to think that there's people around that table thinking, oh my God, like, how am I going to go knock on a door and have a conversation with a voter about how this guy thinks Justin Trudeau should be in jail because he went to the Aga Khan's house? Like, this is not where they want to be. And the kind of distraction that this causes for the party, right? At a time where there's a budget, where truthfully, like, of all the unforced errors, when Carney's got nothing in his hands after, meetings with Trump, and now this Doug Ford thing, and now negotiations are blown up altogether. But we're talking about that, obviously, but there's still a lot of people who are like, what is Pierre Poilievre really up to? And so it makes it hard for the party.
But even in the springtime election, and we heard from conservatives after the fact when the results were all in, that said that conservative candidates were hearing that at the door back then.
Yep.
That, pretty good idea. We kind of like your platform, but your leader sucks. That's all there is to it. And how do you rebut that? I mean, you're stuck with the guy, and you're absolutely right. I mean, if the leadership review, he'll win. First of all, because to save face, the public, the party's always going to do that. Second of all, there's no challenger. There's nobody in the wings. If they say, if we dump this guy, like the NDP did after Tom Mulcair in 2015, they went out there for a policy convention in Edmonton, and Mulcair came back with no job. And they didn't have a leader, and it took them over a year. How'd that work out for them? So I guess the Conservatives don't want to make that same mistake. But I don't see anybody in the wings to say, okay, yeah, we want to dump him. And who else? I mean, now they start talking, well, maybe Andrew Scheer should get another look. He's already had his ride on the horse.
Oh, dear God.
Yeah, exactly. And there's
you don't go
not
back.
Really, exactly. Not too many other options available here to them right now. So, a lot of them are going to hold their nose and say, yeah, let's keep Poilievre at this stage. But you brought up, I think, one point that just about every politician thinks of, but never wants to talk about publicly. Can we win with that guy? Not is this a great policy? Not is this a great platform? Can we win? And I get the sense an awful lot of conservatives right now are saying, I don't think so, or we're not sure. And that's not the sort of attitude you want to have going into an election if that's where we're headed.
I think that's right. I think that an election is a crazy idea and a bad idea for all kinds of reasons right now. But there is a universe where the Liberals want to force this because Pierre Poilievre is still the leader. And he's seen as a liability by enough people, and there's enough of a trust issue. If he shoots himself in the foot with these RCMP comments, this is, perhaps a moment for the Liberals to capitalize on that and run an election when he's still there. Whereas you can imagine a scenario 8 months from now where CUSMA negotiations are completely flattened and we don't know what the hell is coming next, and nobody likes the budget, and Mark Carney's, shine is off him altogether. And maybe Pierre Poilievre looks different in that light, or maybe, the party takes the time to make a change. And I don't know who's out there who wants to do it. For a while, it looked like Jason Kenney was kind of, testing the waters to see what kind of reaction he was going to get. So I don't know, but it just seems like from the Conservatives' perspective, the Liberals have a clearer path to potentially a better result in an election. Although even that, I think they would really run the risk of testing the extent to which people were willing to lend Mark Carney their votes in the last election. And in Quebec in particular, I think that could be a bit of a question mark, because I think a lot of people got behind him thinking this is the guy to help sort this Trump mess. But if given another go at it a year later, I don't know that the Bloc Québécois wouldn't benefit from that.
The other element, and a number of your coworkers and others observing up on the Hill have talked about, is Carney needs a win. And it's not going to be a trade deal with the U.S., although we're told now that before the Ford ad came out a couple of weeks ago, I guess, they said they were pretty close, at least on some of the stuff, steel, aluminum, especially, and energy, which turns out to be maybe discussions about a pipeline. So there seemed to be some semblance of a deal. I don't know how close they really were, but that was the story that was out there on the Hill at the time. So, I mean, how does Carney move forward with that? And at least, like you say, you've got to put a couple of things in the win column right now. The agreement with Indonesia, super idea. People are going to say, yeah, so what's the big deal? The big enchilada here is steel and aluminum, and certainly the major factor that I think ties all of these things together is the auto industry, and that's not a very bright picture right now, right across the country. If there's going to be a vote, and I share your feeling, I hope it's not. I don't think the public wants one at this stage. How does Carney put some things in that side of the ledger here, on the win side, whether it's a trade deal or anything else? I mean, previous to this, of course, in the last election, even Ontario, there were the photo ops, with Stellantis and General Motors and everybody else cutting ribbons, and we're going to build stuff here. We're going to mine the Ring of Fire. Everything's going to be great, and what a great economic future we've got. Well, that was built on a house of cards, obviously, because all it took was a couple of companies to say, you know what, we're not that hot on EVs anymore, and that all fell apart. That's not the government's fault. The government made their commitment financially and otherwise. But I feel like the guys at South Park, blame Canada. It's not worthy. But at the same time, you're the elected official, whether you're an MP, whether you're the Prime Minister or the Finance Minister, you got to wear this. And even through no fault of yours, you've got to come up with a way to try to spin this to say, look, trust us, we're going to make this right. And that seems to be the question. And I think from what I'm seeing in the polls anyway, Laurie, most voters are saying, we don't hate you. We're not blaming you for all of this, but we're kind of waiting now to see, okay, what are you going to do to make my life a little bit better now? You're not going to solve all those problems, but what are you going to try to do to mitigate the input? And, so far, okay, yeah, you've got a fund and you're going to compensate people or retrain people. That's all well and good, but we're kind of looking for something a little bit more right now, aren't we?
Yeah, and I think looking for something that it's not just about helping people through a hard time, which is important. I'm not saying that's a bad idea. I'm saying also what's future forward, right? Like what's hopeful? What are we going to do? Like what's the path forward? Something that you can get excited about.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, to be honest, it's a lot about communication. It's a lot about if you are making progress, if you are scoring wins somewhere, make sure people at home understand that. Do what you need to do to break down that false dichotomy between foreign policy and domestic policy and outcomes, because it's all one and the same. I think the Prime Minister has to really make use of his friendships with premiers. Do not allow this thing with the ad to create distance between yourself and Doug Ford, because Doug Ford is much better than Mark Carney is at explaining how things will affect people. And it's going to be I think, as trying to navigate the next while, trying to find something to put in the win column. Major projects, announcements, anything that's going to affect people's bottom lines, the affordability issue, the cost of living, make sure you have allies like premiers who are helping you tell that story so that people will hear it. Because, if everybody's got their eye on a deal with Trump and it never comes to fruition, you don't want that to be the only win that people will see, and anything less than that is a failure, because then he's screwed. Because I don't think there's a big win from the U.S. coming, not at all.
And it's simply not forthcoming. And right now, though, I mean, we seem to, as a voting bloc, as Canadians, I think we've already decided who wears the white hat and who wears the black hat in these discussions. The ambassador to Canada right now, I mean, shooting his mouth off again at a meeting just a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
Expletives all over the place, and apparently he doesn't like Doug Ford very much. And that goes on. And he's, with Canadian people, I think, generally kind of saying, okay, disregard the guy, he's a clown, just like his boss and all that sort of stuff. But at the same time, what we're looking for here is some, I said, verification, I guess, of what the government is saying they're doing and the results on this. And I know, I assume from what he's telling us, he's going to come back from this Asian trip with some sort of a deal, or, the idea of trade deals, et cetera, things like that. And that's all well and good. But, since we're in the World Series, I guess, Laurie, I'll use the baseball metaphor here. He's hitting a lot of singles, and those are great. You have to have that. But you want to see the odd home run. And we haven't had that yet. And again, that's not totally within their purview. To extend the metaphor, if they're not throwing the ball over the plate, you can't hit the ball out. So there's that element to it. And I think Canadians still understand that. But, trying to find that home run swing is something that I think we're looking for right now. But with all this, I just to bring this kind of full circle again, this is all the stuff that's swirling around in the heads and in the back rooms behind closed doors. When push comes to shove, are they going to try to find a way to make this happen and at least keep this government afloat? Because as you said, even with Poilievre's rhetoric that has been ongoing, but Carney's he's been pretty acerbic in his comments and his criticisms of Carney lately. But there's a case to be made, and I've heard this from some of the conservative pundits, that it's not the right time to bring this government down. Maybe in the springtime, maybe things are going to be different at that time. Probably not much difference with the United States, but not yet. People still don't like their leader. He's got to go through this leadership review right now that actually, they're never going to admit this publicly, but it's probably not in the Conservatives' best interest to bring down the government at this stage. Because historically, and I did some research on this last night before we had our discussion, when minority governments are in a situation like this, and if they are defeated and an election is called where people don't want it, there's a pretty strong indicator in past elections that the public basically says, all right, to hell with you guys, opposition, we're going to give that party their majority. And it happened with Harper. and it's happened in the Liberals in the past. And maybe the Liberals are hoping it's going to happen again. But that's if it's not an eventuality, it's a possibility that this whole thing could backfire on Poilievre, couldn't it?
Oh yeah, 100%. Because at first I thought to myself, it would be crazy for the NDP to let this budget fail, right? Like they have to keep but maybe if like depending on how they look at it, like I look at it and think, my God, you don't have a leader. What are you going to do, right? But weirder things have happened, and they might decide that they don't want to vote for a budget that's labeled the austerity budget, and they'd rather go to the wall against it and have the public see them do that than waste an opportunity, right, to kind of really stand up for something, right? Like I don't know how they'll calculate it. And I think it really depends on what's in the budget. And I'm not sure how much the Liberals have told anybody else about that. Like, are the NDP or the Conservatives or the Bloc aware of the cuts that are coming and what in particular that might look like? I don't know, right? And so it's hard to know, like, what they might have to work on here, like, and what kind of common ground might be there that they can explore, and how committed the parties are to avoiding election. I think that it's possible that it. I mean, Carney doesn't want to call an election; it would blow up in his face.
Yeah,
but I just don't. It's such a risk to me, like for the NDP, for the Conservatives, for them all.
and I can see the Liberal strategy here too. I mean, I think they learned from the last election. Effectively, Poilievre went back to his home riding in Ottawa and simply said, "Vote for me, by the way, and I'll fire you," because an awful lot of the people in that riding were civil servants, and he was quite blatant about this. And it happened in Ontario in a provincial election about 15, 20 years ago, where Tim Hudak had simply said, he was the opposition leader, said, "Vote for me, and I'm going to fire a third of the government workers." Well, that kind of backfired on him too. So you got to hold your cards close to the chest in situations like this, don't you? As Paul Martin did. I mean, in hindsight, we can look back and say the guy was an outstanding finance minister because, he brought us back from the precipice. We were in terrible financial situations as a nation then. And within a couple of years, not only had he eradicated the deficits, but at the same time, 11 years of surpluses. And they say that's great money management. But there was a lot of pain that occurred then. It's like childbirth. You forget about it after a while, but you went through it at the time. And an awful lot of people, especially in the civil service, lost their jobs. There were some cuts that in fact impacted municipalities to a certain extent. And that may well be on the horizon right now, but it's in the interest of the government right now not to talk about that a whole lot, simply to say we're going to find some savings, but let's give you the fine details later.
Yep. Exactly. And yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right about the Chrétien Martin years. Like, that was really hard for the party, right? Like, I was living in Cape Breton then. That's where, and in Halifax, and that's where I grew up. And the number of people who thought, this is not what I voted for when I voted Liberal, right? To see these huge cuts to transfer payments to the provinces and things like that. And I'm wondering if that's, like, Carney says he's not going to cut that stuff, but how are you going to balance all this if you don't? Like, I just feel like there's a lot that we don't know at this point.
Well, as they say in the business, more to come on this, and we'll certainly love to talk to you about that as things start to unfold over the next couple of weeks, especially. Laurie, always a pleasure. Thank you so very, very much for being with us on the podcast today. Great.
Thanks for having me.
Dr. Laurie Turnbull, of course, keeping an eye on what's happening in our nation's capital. And that's it for this edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast. Catch us, of course, wherever you get your podcasts. If you're on YouTube, great to have you with us. Don't forget to hit that notification bell and the subscription bell as well. We really do appreciate your support, and more people are jumping on side every time, and we do appreciate that. Thanks to Madeline Kelly for the great work with the production on this one. Until next time, I'm Bill Kelly. Stay in touch and stay informed.
Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast. Critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.